Have you ever dreaded a conversation at work knowing it was going to be uncomfortable or even a difficult conversation all the way around? Maybe it was going to be confrontational. Difficult conversations really are inevitable, aren't they? But they don't have to be so stressful. Hi, I'm Heather Younger, and today we'll explore how you'll be able to navigate these challenging circumstances with grace and effectiveness by embracing active listening and practicing caring leadership principles. You can transform tough talks into opportunities to grow and to understand. So, you ready to master this whole art of difficult conversations thing? Let's dive in together. So I can think of a couple different circumstances where I was facing some difficult conversations and I was a little uneasy about it, but I had to do it. And in both situations, I was a manager. In one situation, I had a team member of mine who her behavior was slipping quite a bit. And I was concerned and I was wondering what was happening with her. And I knew I was going to have a conversation about what was going on with her. As I brought her into the office, I walked through some steps to kind of gain some understanding, but also in order to immediately put her at ease, I wanted to make sure that she knew she wasn't in trouble or anything, but I just needed to understand maybe what was going on with her. As I walked through the scenario with her and asked her some questions and leaned in to listen and to just, show her some empathy and some compassion, I discovered that she was going through a tough time. She thought she was being stalked actually outside of work, and it was impacting her mindset and her behavior and performance, and she was getting into work late. And again, I wouldn't have known that if I didn't lean in, if I didn't ask, if I didn't pause and just wait for her to tell me what her truth was. I really leaned in to understand that. Then I was able to work with her to kind of get back, her back on a place of that I was comfortable with as it related to her behavior at work, and at the same time, her feeling more safe at work, at home, overarchingly. I was trying to work with her on her emotional well-being, so that then at that point she would feel more comfortable, just again to show up, make sure she wasn't necessarily even having to keep this thing to herself, but she felt supported in the process. I can also think of a conversation where I had discovered a couple of my team members, they were reporting to a team lead, and that team lead was my direct report. And they were acting not according to our agreed upon values on this recorded call. They didn't think about it as a recording call, but they were talking amongst themselves. They were customer service agents. They were talking amongst themselves on a recorded line, and they were talking in a negative way about the team leader. Well, it was the team leader's job to make sure that she listened to a certain percentage of calls, maybe 30-40% of the calls that were made from these two customer service agents, to make sure that she could help them improve as it related to customer experience. Well, one day she was listening to a call, and she heard those two people, literally the entire call was dedicated to talking stuff about her. And she was very hurt. She came to me, asked me to listen to the recording, and I did. And then I brought the people into the office. But I, again, felt uncomfortable about doing it because I just knew I was going to have to call them on the carpet. I knew I was going to have to set them straight and remind them of the values that we actually, by the way, co-created together. So I brought them into the office as individually, asked each of them individually, kind of what were they thinking, what was going on, what's happening, to try to just understand the why. Now, I was not by any stretch of the imagination going to validate the fact that they did this thing, but I did know that I needed to understand why they did it. And then at the same time, I needed to set the mark for them, to help them course correct, let them know that this was not something I was going to ever think was acceptable, and that it was counter to what it was our values, again, the values that we all agreed upon together. And for individual instances, in both those instances, I actually decided to write both of them up, wrote them up based upon our company values and our team values that we agreed upon together. And again, it was an uncomfortable conversation. I did take the time to listen. And at the same time, I had to express to them why I was so frustrated with that behavior, how that team lead always looked out for them. And in this case, they really hurt her and put her down, even though she was always going out of her way to help them. So those were both very difficult conversations. And so I'm going to give you some tips on how do you go into these conversations in a different way. So I would say the very first thing you want to do when you're going into a different conversation is to go in with an open and curious mind. This is going to be absolutely critical, because if we don't go into it with an open and curious mind, then we're going to go in there to be right. And going in there to be right is never going to be the right way to do it. We want to make sure that we lean in, ask questions. And when I mean ask the right questions, I mean that you want to make sure that you are asking the open-ended questions that let them talk and tell you all the things, and then asking the close-ended questions when you think you understand what it is that they're telling you, so that you can move the conversation along, so that the conversation doesn't have to fester, let's say, right? You get to move it along to be more solution focused. The other thing is, like I said in those other conversations, particularly that first one, express empathy and kindness through the conversation. Sometimes you're sitting there and you may be thinking, oh gosh, this person is just ridiculous, or how could they even think this is the right way? But if you sit there and you express that empathy and kindness towards them, they're going to be more likely to share more. And again, in difficult conversations, we want to get to the truth. We need to peel back the onion so we can help to find a solution, and help them land on it. As you're in that conversation and you're showing that empathy and kindness, you're going to have to confirm your understanding of what it is they're saying. And so instead of don't parrot back to them what you just heard, but definitely repeat and paraphrase just certain things about what it is you heard, so that they understand that you're following along, and that whatever their concerns were, whatever it was that made them do a certain thing, they understand that you see them. They understand that you hear them. It doesn't mean that you understand that you agree with them, just that you are understanding what is happening and what it is that was happening in their life to make them act a certain way. Because then sometimes it can be, okay, maybe you're the one who helps them course correct or change that circumstance, so that they don't then go and do the same thing over and over again, which then could keep them on a bad course, and just depends on what they're doing inside the workplace. It could be kind of negative repercussions as it relates to that behavior. The other thing is making sure that you set what your expectations are, and then understand what their expectations are of you in this relationship and in the conversation that you just had. Sometimes we have these difficult conversations and then it just ends, or we leave, and then everybody is left feeling a little bit gray about what they're supposed to do next. They don't understand what steps they need to take to improve behavior, improve relationships, improve conversations, improve perceptions, whatever that might be. So we have to be very clear before we leave what expectations we have and what expectations they have, so that we can know then what the next steps are. And that would be the other thing I would say. Make sure that before you leave these difficult conversations, you come up with a set of next steps for both parties that are inside the conversation. So it could be something like, okay, so Jennifer, based upon what we just talked about, we agreed to X, Y, Z, and so you're going to do these two, and I'm going to do this last one. Is that where we both landed on this? Is that where you understood it? And then they say, oh, yes, okay, great. And we also agree that we're going to come back to each other next week to see how all these new steps are going, okay? And then they both agree, and then everybody walks away. Again, this is if you're in a manager role, but it doesn't have to be. It could also be if you're someone who, you're a manager, you're speaking to them. And you want to make sure that you're setting expectations on what's the next step, what you're going to do, and what they're responsible for. That way there's no grayness, because we enter into these difficult conversations. Sometimes there's hurt feelings when we left, sometimes not. Sometimes when we leave, we don't feel like there's hurt feelings. We feel really understood and seen in it because of that empathy and the kindness and the seeking and the listening that we are doing. But sometimes there is that grayness. And so if we can be really clear, that's good. And then I would say the very last step as we exit the difficult conversations is that we also are closing the loop. And closing the loop in my world really just means that you're dotting the I and crossing the T on listening. You are telling them that what they told you in the meeting when you were having that conversation, here's what you've done based upon what you promised to them. And after you've done that, now you come back to them and just say, thank you, thanks for that feedback. Thanks for that conversation. That conversation was very helpful for me to understand what you were doing, why you were doing it, what were the triggers for that. And then based upon what we said we would do, I promised you two things, and here's what I've done. And so let's talk about what that looks like. Is that helpful for you? Did that help move you forward in your journey? So those are the ways that you can make sure that you transform like difficult conversations that are normally stressful into ones that really can be a more calming thing, one that makes the person at the other end feel heard, valued, understood, and you get more out of the workplace when you feel like you've done that a really good job inside that meeting. So hopefully that was helpful. I'll look forward to hearing any of your comments, hearing your feedback as it relates to how you were able to conquer difficult conversations now, knowing some of these steps. Be well.